All right, let's talk about a technology that has completely flipped the modern data center on its head, server virtualization. You've definitely heard the term, but getting the strategy right behind it can be a massive multi-million-dollar decision. So today, we're going to cut through the noise and get straight to the core questions you absolutely need to answer. So let me ask you a question first. Just picture your server racks for a second. Are they all humming away, actually doing hard work? Or are most of them kind of running on empty? This is a huge, often hidden cost. You see, in a traditional setup, most physical servers are only using a tiny fraction of their actual power. We're talking maybe 15 to 20% capacity, leaving all that expensive hardware just sitting there burning power. So to get this right, we're digging into a guide from Virtualization Options LLC. They're a technology research and advisory firm based out of Colorado. And what they've done is boiled this whole complex process down into 5 critical questions. We're going to walk through the business case, the tech itself, how to keep it resilient, what the real costs are, and finally, how to make sure your investment is future-proof. Let's start with the big one. So why even do this in the first place? Beyond all the buzzwords, what's the fundamental business reason for virtualizing your servers? Well, the answer really starts with one word: efficiency. And the change in that efficiency is, well, it's just staggering. A typical traditional server might be idling along at about 15% utilization. But with virtualization, that number just skyrockets to 80% or even higher. You're basically making one physical machine do the work of 5 or 6. That completely changes the entire economic equation of your data center. And that massive jump in efficiency, it hits the bottom line hard. By consolidating all those underused servers, companies typically slash their hardware acquisition costs by 60 to 80%. And get this, that's before you even start counting the huge savings on things like power, cooling, and just plain physical space. The whole concept is really just a simple shift in thinking. We move away from that old one-to-one model, where one single application gets its own dedicated physical server. And we move to a many-to-one model. So now you can have a whole bunch of applications, each living in its own perfectly isolated virtual machine, all running happily and efficiently on a single powerful server. Okay, so that covers the why. Now for the fun part, the how. Let's pull back the curtain and look at the core tech that makes all of this possible. It all boils down to this really clever piece of software called a hypervisor. This is the secret sauce. Think of it as the ultimate traffic cop for your server. It sits right between the physical hardware and all those virtual machines, and its job is to manage the flow of resources, CPU, memory, storage, making sure every single application gets exactly what it needs right when it needs it without ever bumping into the others. From an architectural standpoint, it's a pretty clean, simple 3-layer stack. You start at the bottom with your physical hardware, the metal. Then the hypervisor software sits directly on top of that. And then on top of the hypervisor, you have all your completely isolated virtual machines. Each one is running its own operating system and its own apps. And here's the cool part. Each one is totally unaware that it's even sharing hardware. Now, when it comes to this hypervisor layer, you've got choices. The market has some heavy hitters from VMware and Microsoft, but there are also some incredibly powerful open source options like KVM. So the strategic question isn't really which one is the best. It's which one is the best fit for our specific environment, our budget, and our long-term plan. All this efficiency is fantastic, but it does raise a pretty critical question. If you're putting way more eggs into fewer baskets, how do you make sure you protect those baskets? And that brings us to resilience and security. Right. This is the question that keeps IT managers tossing and turning at night. What happens if a physical server suddenly dies? What if an entire data center goes offline? In the old world, recovering from that meant days, sometimes weeks, of painful manual rebuilding. But with virtualization, the answer to that question fundamentally changes. Your recovery time shrinks from days down to minutes. That's because a virtual machine is really just a self-contained package of files. You can copy it, you can move it, you can back it up easily. If one physical server fails, the system can automatically just restart those virtual machines on another healthy server, often with nobody even noticing there was a problem. And the security story here is just as strong.
Modern platforms have multiple layers of defense built right in. That VM isolation we talked about means if one virtual server has a problem, it can't spread to its neighbors. Your data is encrypted, whether it's sitting still or being moved. And you have really tight role-based access controls to make sure people can only see and touch the specific resources they're actually authorized to.
Okay, this all sounds pretty amazing, I know. But we need to talk about the money. What is the real cost to do this? Because, let me tell you, the software license is just the very beginning of the financial story.
To really get the full picture, you have to look at something called the total cost of ownership, or TCO. The software licenses themselves are just one slice of the pie. You also have to factor in any new hardware you might need, the ongoing support and maintenance contracts, and, this is a big one, the cost of training your team to manage this whole new way of doing things.
And that report from Virtualization Options LLC offers a super critical warning about some of these hidden costs. It states, and I'm quoting here, that projects can fail when compatibility is assumed rather than verified. This is a huge trap. You can't just assume your old apps or your existing hardware will just work. You have to test and you have to verify everything. If you don't, the whole project could be at risk. And that brings us to our final and maybe most strategic question of all. How do you make a choice today that isn't going to corner you tomorrow? Basically, how do you future-proof this massive investment? Here's the key insight, the big idea to take away. Server virtualization isn't the final destination. It's the launchpad. It is the fundamental layer that makes the next waves of IT innovation even possible. It's the technology that enables modern containers. It's the bedrock of any serious hybrid cloud strategy. And it's the platform you need for the coming world of AI-driven operations. So the final question you really have to ask yourself isn't just about features, and it isn't just about price. It's about partnership. You're not just buying a piece of software, you are choosing the platform that is going to define your company's agility for the next decade. So the real question is, who are you going to build that future with? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.